A different kind of test. James Reynolds shifted in his seat, tapping his fingers rhythmically against the steering wheel as he navigated through the busy city streets. The gleaming facade of Capital City Motors soon came into view, the dealership standing tall with its glass walls and polished floors that seemed to mirror the ambitions of those who walked within it. For James, however, this wasn't just another dealership visit. In the past few weeks, James had received whispers about questionable behavior taking place at some of his company's branches. Discriminatory practices, dismissive attitudes, and a lack of genuine customer care. Rumors he'd hoped were unfounded. As the CEO of Capital Motors Group, he believed deeply in creating a customer-centric, welcoming environment at every location. To hear otherwise was a direct affront to everything he'd built. As James pulled into the dealership's lot, he purposely dressed down. A simple jacket over a collared shirt, well-worn jeans, and modest shoes. Clothes that wouldn't necessarily turn heads in a luxury car showroom. His car, too, was a modest sedan, polished but not flashy. He didn't want to look like a CEO today. He wanted to see what his customers saw. Stepping out of his car, he took a deep breath of the cool morning air, letting it calm his nerves. The entrance to the dealership was bustling with people. Sales representatives hurried between customers, smiles painted across their faces, and the showroom's polished cars sparkled under the fluorescent lights. James adjusted his jacket and stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room to take in the atmosphere. As he wandered, his attention was drawn to a nearby conversation between a salesman and an older couple. The salesman was exuberant, showcasing a high-end luxury vehicle with such enthusiasm that even James, with his many years in the industry, found himself impressed. James's jaw tightened. The implication was clear. The salesman didn't believe he could afford the car. He decided to press the man a bit further, hoping he might show some professionalism. "And what are the primary differences between this model and the one you're showing over there?" he asked, gesturing to another high-end model across the room. The salesman shrugged, clearly uninterested. "Look, all of these models are pretty similar. They just vary in a few specs. If you really want to get into the details, you'd have to meet with our finance team. Otherwise, maybe you could check out some of our pre-owned options. You'll get a good deal without, breaking the bank." Just as James was about to respond, another customer, a man in an expensive-looking suit, walked in. The salesman's demeanor transformed instantly. His posture straightened, and his previously apathetic expression was replaced by a radiant smile. "Excuse me," he said to James, not bothering to wait for a response. "I'll be right back." James watched as the salesman rushed over to the new arrival, greeting him with the warmth and enthusiasm that had been notably absent during their own conversation. From his vantage point, James could hear bits and pieces of the conversation. The salesman's tone was animated, filled with genuine interest as he began explaining the features of the exact car James had just inquired about. Feeling more disheartened than angry, James stepped back, allowing the man to finish his pitch without interruption. He moved toward a quieter corner of the showroom, observing the interactions around him. Salespeople moved quickly, effortlessly gravitating toward the clients who looked like potential buyers, while those dressed more modestly, like himself, were largely ignored or given minimal attention. As James stood there, a young woman in a dealership uniform finally approached him. Her demeanor was nervous, and she looked slightly out of place in the bustling showroom filled with confident salespeople. "Hello, sir," she said, her voice barely audible. "Can I help you with anything?" James offered her a warm smile, appreciating the gesture. "Just browsing, thank you," he replied. The young woman nodded, her face reflecting a mixture of relief and uncertainty, before she quickly moved on. James couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She was likely new or low on the hierarchy, given her timid approach and the way she avoided the gaze of the more seasoned sales staff. Her attempt to reach out, however, was a stark contrast to the indifferent manner of the salesman he had first encountered. Deciding he'd seen enough, James began making his way toward the front desk, where the dismissive salesman was now laughing and chatting with the customer in the suit. The stark difference in his body language and tone was unmistakable. James waited patiently, his presence going unnoticed as the two continued their animated conversation. When a moment finally arrived, he cleared his throat. The salesman glanced over, his face falling slightly when he recognized James. "Oh, you're back," he said flatly. "Did you need something else?" Before James could respond, another voice cut through the air. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't know you'd be visiting today." It was Tom Ferris, the dealership manager, who had just entered from the office at the back. Tom's face lit up with surprise and mild panic as he hurried toward James, extending his hand warmly. "It's great to see you here, sir. If I'd known you were coming by, I would have arranged a proper welcome." The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The salesman's confident posture faltered, and his face drained of color as he glanced from Tom to James, his mind piecing together what he had failed to recognize earlier. The truth beneath the surface. Tom's warm greeting was laced with both genuine surprise and an underlying hint of nervousness. He'd been with Capital Motors for over a decade, a dedicated manager whose performance and reputation had earned him James's respect on multiple occasions. But now, James noticed an uncharacteristic anxiety flickering in Tom's gaze, as if he were already aware that his team's behavior today might be under scrutiny. "Thank you, Tom," James replied with a steady nod, firmly shaking his hand. "I wanted to stop by and see how things are running here firsthand. Sometimes it's good to get a feel for the day-to-day from a customer's perspective." Tom's eyes widened just slightly, and he glanced at the salesman, whose previously smug demeanor had dissolved into awkward silence. James didn't miss the way the salesman shifted uneasily on his feet, his confidence nowhere to be found. Tom picked up on the tension as well, his brow furrowing as he pieced together what might have transpired before his arrival. "Absolutely, sir," Tom said, the cheerfulness in his voice dimming just a touch. "It's always good to get your perspective. If there's anything you'd like to see or if you need any information, I'd be more than happy to assist you personally." The salesman cleared his throat, his voice coming out shaky. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't realize, if I'd known," he stammered, his words stumbling over each other as he struggled to mask his discomfort. James held up a hand, stopping him. "You didn't realize I was who, exactly." His tone was calm, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The salesman swallowed, his face flushing as he seemed to understand that there was no graceful way to recover. "I didn't realize you were the owner, sir," he mumbled, casting his gaze down at the floor. James nodded, letting the silence settle around them, a silence that seemed to amplify the uneasy shuffling of the salesman and the low murmur of conversations across the showroom. "And if you had known," he pressed. The salesman's face grew paler, and he struggled to meet James's gaze. I would have given you more information, of course, and been more attentive." The admission was reluctant, his voice barely above a whisper, but there was no evading the truth. James looked around, letting his gaze settle on the other salespeople scattered throughout the showroom. Each seemed to have noticed the unfolding drama, their attention carefully veiled as they continued their conversations with clients, but James could feel their collective awareness, as though they were all bracing for the repercussions of what had just transpired. "Tom," James said, turning back to the manager, his voice carrying a calm authority that cut through the tension. "Let's step into your office. I think we need to discuss a few things." Tom nodded quickly, casting a final, unreadable glance at the salesman before leading James toward the back of the showroom. As they walked, James noticed how every employee seemed to shift just slightly, their postures rigid with an awareness that their boss was present and watching. It was a reminder of how swiftly the mood could change when authority entered the room, but that change in demeanor felt hollow to him. Respect and professionalism should be constants, not conditional responses to the presence of an owner. Once inside Tom's office, the noise from the showroom faded, replaced by an almost stifling quiet. Tom shut the door and gestured toward a chair, But James remained standing, folding his arms as he took a steadying breath. He wanted to approach this conversation with clarity, with a focus on finding solutions rather than just doling out consequences. Yet the memory of the salesman's dismissive tone lingered, stirring a lingering disappointment he couldn't easily shake. "Tom," James began, his voice measured, "I came in today to get a sense of how we're serving our customers, and what I've seen so far. It's not what I expected, or what I built this company to represent." Tom's face grew somber, and he nodded slowly. "I understand, sir. I know that Capital Motors stands for integrity, for treating every customer with respect, and that's what we strive for. I'm sorry if what you experienced today fell short of those standards." James paused, considering Tom's response. "It's not just about what I experienced. I've been hearing reports for weeks, stories of customers being dismissed, ignored, or talked down to. And I wanted to see for myself if it was true. Today, I got my answer." Tom's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of James's words clearly sinking in. I wasn't aware things had gotten this bad," he admitted, his voice carrying a note of regret. "I do my best to monitor the staff, to make sure they're following protocol, but I can't catch everything. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Reynolds." James nodded, understanding the challenge of managing such a large and busy showroom. "I know, Tom, and I'm not saying this is entirely on you, but it does start from the top. If the staff here are acting in ways that contradict our values, then we need to examine the culture that's allowing it to happen. Tell me honestly, are you seeing any signs of this attitude problem among your team?" Tom hesitated, then sighed. "To be honest, I have noticed that some of our top-performing salespeople can be selective about who they approach. They tend to prioritize clients who they think will be able to make larger purchases. It's not something I've formally addressed, but I've seen it here and there." James raised an eyebrow. "Why hasn't it been addressed?" Tom looked down, a flicker of discomfort passing across his face. "In this industry, numbers talk, Mr. Reynolds. Some of these guys, like Brandon, the salesman you spoke with, bring in significant revenue. They hit targets, and I think I let that cloud my judgment. I focused on the sales figures rather than their approach. I didn't want to rock the boat." James took a deep breath, his initial disappointment giving way to a more profound understanding of the underlying issue. It was a dilemma he'd encountered before: top performers whose numbers shielded them from accountability, the high-revenue earners who became almost untouchable because they brought in results, even if they did so at the expense of the company's values. "I get it, Tom," he said, his tone softening. "But there's a difference between encouraging high performance and turning a blind eye to unethical behavior. If a salesperson can't treat every customer with respect, then they're not really representing Capital Motors, no matter how many cars they sell." Tom nodded, visibly grappling with the weight of James's words. "You're right, sir. I see that now. It's just hard to find that balance. But I'll make sure things change. I don't want our reputation tarnished by the actions of a few people." James placed a reassuring hand on Tom's shoulder. "I know you want what's best for the company, Tom, and I believe you're capable of making the changes we need. But it can't just be about this one incident or this one salesperson. We need a comprehensive plan to ensure that every employee here understands that every customer matters, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing." Tom looked determined, the nervousness in his eyes replaced with a sense of resolve. "I'll work on that right away. We'll start with a meeting to address the current issues and reinforce our commitment to treating every client equally. And I'll take a closer look at our training programs to make sure respect and empathy are at the core." James nodded approvingly. "Good. Let's focus on making Capital Motors a place where people feel valued, no matter who they are. And as for Brandon," he paused, contemplating the appropriate course of action, "I'd like you to speak with him directly. Explain to him where he went wrong, and make it clear that if he can't change his attitude, he might need to find somewhere else to work. Performance is important, but character and respect are non-negotiable. Tom agreed, gratitude evident in his expression. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I appreciate your guidance. I'll make sure Brandon, and everyone else, gets the message." Satisfied, James extended his hand, which Tom shook with renewed commitment. "I'm counting on you, Tom. Let's make Capital Motors a place we can both be proud of." As they left the office, James noted the shift in the room's energy. Employees looked up as he walked by, and whispers rippled through the crowd, each one tinged with speculation and nervous anticipation. He knew that news of his visit and the conversations in Tom's office would spread quickly, and he hoped that this would be the first step toward transforming the dealership's culture. Just as James approached the exit, he caught sight of Brandon, standing by the sales desk with a look of barely concealed panic. Their eyes met briefly, and James held his gaze, letting a subtle but unmistakable message pass between them. Respect is earned through actions, not appearances. And today, Brandon had learned that lesson the hard way. The ripple effect. The days following James Reynolds' visit were filled with an uneasy tension that seemed to settle over Capital City Motors like a dense fog. Word of the incident had spread through the dealership in hushed whispers, each retelling laced with additional details as employees speculated on what it meant for them, their coworkers, and the dealership's future. Brandon, the once proud salesman at the center of the drama, was now a shadow of his former self. His usual swagger had faded, replaced by a strained smile and an uneasy silence that lingered around him like a cloud. It wasn't just the dressing down he'd received from Tom, the dealership manager, that weighed on him. It was the realization that his behavior had not only been witnessed by the CEO himself, but had also exposed a deeper issue that went beyond his single interaction with James. Brandon's day began with an email from Tom, summoning him to a meeting with himself and the regional sales director. It was a meeting he both dreaded and knew was inevitable. Capital Motors had strict protocols for customer treatment, protocols he had blatantly ignored in favor of his own judgments about who looked serious and who didn't. He felt a nervous anticipation settle in his stomach as he made his way to Tom's office. The regional director, Marcus Yates, a seasoned professional with a reputation for fairness, but a low tolerance for nonsense, was already waiting inside with Tom. As Brandon took a seat across from them, he noticed the solemn expressions on their faces, and the weight of the situation began to settle on him more heavily. "Brandon," Tom began, folding his hands on the desk, "we need to have a serious discussion about your conduct. I don't think I need to remind you of what happened when Mr. Reynolds visited." Brandon swallowed, feeling the weight of their gazes on him. I didn't know he was the CEO," he stammered, trying to find words that might lessen the impact of his actions. "If I'd known." Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "That's precisely the issue, Brandon. You didn't know he was the CEO, and because of that, you decided he wasn't worth your attention. That approach to customer service is unacceptable in this company, regardless of whether someone is wearing a suit or jeans." Brandon shifted uncomfortably, feeling a hot flush rise in his cheeks. He opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus continued, his voice steady and authoritative. "I've reviewed your past performance reports. While your sales numbers are impressive, there have been multiple complaints about your behavior from customers, and even a few from your colleagues. Each time, the issues were brushed aside because you bring in high revenue. But that ends now." Tom leaned forward, his expression softer but equally resolute. "Brandon, I'm giving you a choice. You can either accept a formal warning, along with a probationary period where you'll undergo additional training in customer relations and company values, or you can choose to leave Capital Motors. But if you stay, you'll need to genuinely change your approach." Brandon felt his throat tighten. The idea of being placed on probation, forced to attend training with newer, younger employees, was a blow to his ego, but the alternative, losing his position, his high commissions, and his reputation, felt even worse. After a long pause, he nodded reluctantly. I'll take the probation," he muttered, barely meeting their eyes. Tom nodded, a hint of relief in his gaze. Good. The training sessions will start next week, and you'll be assigned a mentor who will guide you through Capital Motors' customer service standards. Marcus added, and Brandon, know that this isn't just about fulfilling a quota. We expect a real change, not just in how you interact with customers, but in how you think about them. If we don't see that, then this will be your last chance with us. Brandon nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and shame. He left the office with the weight of their words pressing down on him, and for the first time in his career, he felt genuinely uncertain about his place in the company. Meanwhile, Tom didn't waste any time. He understood that the issue wasn't isolated to Brandon alone. It was a deeper, systemic problem that had quietly taken root among the sales staff. To address it, he scheduled a mandatory meeting for all employees at the dealership, from the sales team to the receptionists and even the junior interns. The meeting was held in the main conference room, where rows of chairs were filled with employees, each one shifting uncomfortably as they sensed the importance of the occasion. Tom stood at the front, flanked by Marcus and a representative from Capital Motors' Human Resources Department. A large presentation screen displayed the company's mission statement, its words seeming to take on new significance in the wake of recent events. Respect, integrity, and service for all. Tom cleared his throat, letting the room settle into silence. I've gathered all of you here today to address an issue that's been building for far too long. Capital Motors was built on the principles of inclusivity and respect, yet we've allowed a culture to grow where some customers are valued more than others, purely based on appearance. He paused, letting his words sink in, watching the reactions around the room. Some employees looked down, avoiding his gaze, while others glanced at one another with uncertainty. Brandon, seated in the back, felt the stares of his coworkers shift in his direction, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We are here to serve everyone who walks through those doors, Tom continued, his voice firm. No matter what they're wearing, what car they arrived in, or how much we think they might spend. Everyone deserves the same level of respect and service. And if that's something any of you feel you can't deliver, then Capital Motors isn't the right place for you. Marcus stepped forward next, his gaze scanning the room. In the coming weeks, we'll be implementing new training programs focused on customer relations and ethical sales practices. Each of you will be required to attend, regardless of your position. We'll also be introducing a feedback system where customers can directly report their experiences, both good and bad. This will give us a better understanding of how we're doing and where we need to improve. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of apprehension and, for some, quiet approval. Tom could see a few nods of agreement, particularly from the newer employees and those who had always felt a bit sidelined by the high-performing, often arrogant sales staff. One of the junior sales associates, a young woman named Sarah who had only been with the dealership for a few months, raised her hand hesitantly. Tom gestured for her to speak. Will this mean there's a change in how we're evaluated too? She asked, her voice wavering slightly. Sometimes it feels like the only thing that matters is how much we sell, not how we treat people. Tom's expression softened. That's an excellent point, Sarah, and one I've been considering as well. Effective immediately, we'll be incorporating customer feedback into performance evaluations. Sales numbers are important, but they're only part of the picture. Moving forward, customer satisfaction will hold equal weight in determining bonuses, promotions, and other incentives. A few nods of approval met his words, particularly from the employees who had always prided themselves on customer service, but felt overshadowed by colleagues who achieved higher sales through more aggressive tactics. The atmosphere in the room began to shift, a new sense of purpose taking root. As the meeting wrapped up, Tom gave one final reminder. Remember, we are a team. If you see a colleague slipping or struggling, help them. Remind each other of the values that Capital Motors stands for. This isn't just a job. It's a commitment to uphold something bigger than ourselves. Let's work together to make Capital Motors a place where everyone feels welcome. As the employees began to file out of the conference room, there was a noticeable shift in the air. Conversations were quieter, more reflective, as people considered the new direction the dealership was taking. Brandon lingered at the back, watching his coworkers, feeling a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. He knew his reputation was tarnished, and he wasn't sure if he'd ever fully regain the respect of his colleagues. But part of him, a part he hadn't fully recognized before, felt grateful for the chance to start again, to prove that he could change. The following week, the first round of training sessions began, with Brandon attending alongside other employees. The sessions weren't just lectures, but interactive workshops where employees shared experiences, discussed challenges, and engaged in exercises designed to build empathy and understanding. The sessions emphasized the importance of seeing each customer as an individual, a person with their own story and needs, rather than just a potential sale. Brandon found himself sitting across from Sarah, the junior associate who had spoken up during the meeting. She seemed hesitant around him, her responses polite but distant, a reminder of how his reputation now preceded him. During a role-playing exercise, he was assigned the role of a salesperson, while Sarah played the part of a customer. "Hello, ma'am," he began, his voice more tentative than usual. "How can I assist you today?" Sarah looked at him thoughtfully, playing along with the exercise. "I'm interested in one of the higher-end models, but I'm not sure if it's within my budget." Brandon paused, feeling a flash of the old judgment he used to carry. But he quickly pushed it aside, remembering the lessons of the past week. "Let's take a look at it together," he said warmly, "and I'll make sure you get all the information you need. We'll find the right fit for you." Sarah looked surprised, and for the first time, Brandon noticed a small smile on her face, a glimmer of acceptance he hadn't expected. The simple act of treating her with respect, even in a training exercise, felt strangely fulfilling. As the days went on, Brandon realized he had a long journey ahead. But as he watched his colleagues begin to warm to him again, and felt the culture of the dealership subtly shifting, he knew that he was on the right path. For the first time in his career, Brandon understood that true success wasn't just about closing sales. It was about building relationships, one respectful interaction at a time. Shifts in perspective. In the weeks that followed Capital City Motors' shift in culture, subtle yet meaningful changes began to take shape. Employees, once solely focused on numbers and commissions, now found themselves reevaluating their approach to customer interactions. For many, the transition was challenging, a recalibration of their deeply ingrained habits and attitudes. Yet, as the company's new values became woven into the fabric of daily operations, something unexpected blossomed, a sense of genuine camaraderie. A feeling that they were part of something more significant than just selling cars. Brandon, meanwhile, found himself on a journey he had never anticipated. The probation period was still fresh in his mind, its conditions reminding him daily of the importance of humility and growth. Where once he had prided himself on his high commission numbers and the respect it commanded, now he found himself under scrutiny for reasons he'd rather forget. His colleagues had seen his stumble, his once-admired confidence stripped down to the essentials. It wasn't just his reputation on the line. It was his very identity as a salesman, and more importantly, as a person. For the first time in years, Brandon felt the need to prove himself in a new way. The probationary training sessions had become his lifeline, each one offering a fresh chance to learn not just about customer service, but also about himself. Brandon found himself connecting with his peers in ways he hadn't expected, and slowly he began to realize how limited his previous perspective had been. One morning, Sarah approached him before the showroom opened, her expression warm but inquisitive. Sarah was a junior associate with Capital Motors, known for her meticulous approach and genuine care for clients, though she had often been overshadowed by more assertive salespeople. Since her question at the meeting, Brandon had come to admire her honesty and openness. "Hey, Brandon," she began, her tone tentative. "How's it going with the training? I've noticed you've been really focused lately." Brandon managed a small smile. "It's going Definitely not easy. I didn't realize how much I'd been stuck in my own habits, you know. I guess I got too comfortable with my way of doing things. Sarah nodded, crossing her arms thoughtfully. I get that. I think we all get a bit caught up sometimes. But I can see you're trying. Honestly, it's been good for everyone to go through this together. Brandon studied her for a moment, the sincerity in her words unexpectedly moving. Thanks, Sarah. That means a lot, actually. I know I have a lot to prove, and I can't change everything overnight. But I'm committed to doing better. Sarah smiled. Good. It's never too late to start fresh. She paused, then added, if you ever want any tips on handling customers, you know, from the ground up, I'd be happy to help. Brandon laughed, surprised by her offer. You know, I might actually take you up on that. I could use a new perspective. Sarah's small gesture made a surprisingly significant impact on him. He had always seen himself as a mentor to the younger, less experienced associates, someone they could look up to for guidance. Yet here he was, finding value in advice from a colleague he might have once overlooked. The conversation marked a turning point, not just in how Brandon saw himself, but also in how he viewed his colleagues. Around the same time, Tom was busy implementing the customer feedback system he had promised. The new initiative allowed customers to submit their experiences through a digital feedback form, available immediately after their visit or online from home. Each week, the staff would gather for a feedback review, where both positive and constructive comments were shared. The transparency was refreshing, fostering a culture of accountability and recognition. During one of these review sessions, a piece of feedback came in that struck a chord with the entire team. A customer had left a detailed review describing their recent experience with Capital City Motors, sharing how they had felt welcomed and respected from the moment they walked in. The customer wrote, "It's rare to walk into a luxury car dealership and feel truly seen and valued, especially when you don't fit the typical profile. I'm an artist, and my lifestyle might not scream luxury buyer, but from the first interaction to the final handshake, I felt respected." The sales associate, Brandon, was attentive, patient, and made me feel like my business genuinely mattered. I'll be recommending Capital City Motors to everyone I know. When Tom read the feedback aloud, a hush fell over the room. The team exchanged glances, and all eyes slowly turned toward Brandon, who sat in the corner, visibly taken aback. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure how to respond. The previous Brandon might have dismissed the praise as something he expected. But this time, he felt an unfamiliar but profound sense of pride, not because of a sale, but because he had made a real difference in someone's experience. Marcus, who was overseeing the feedback review that day, looked at Brandon with a nod of approval. "This is what we're aiming for, everyone. And Brandon, thank you for stepping up and showing what we're capable of. That's exactly the kind of respect we want each of our clients to feel." Brandon felt his cheeks flush, a mixture of pride and humility overwhelming him. For the first time, he realized that respect was something that wasn't just given based on achievements. It was earned through small, genuine actions. It was a validation he hadn't known he needed, and it spurred him on even more. As time went on, Brandon noticed that his relationships with clients were evolving. He found himself listening more, paying attention not just to what customers said but to what they needed. He began to understand that selling a car wasn't about pushing a product. It was about connecting people with something that would genuinely enhance their lives. One afternoon, an elderly man named Mr. Green walked into the dealership, his gait slow but purposeful. Brandon noticed him standing near the entrance, gazing around as though unsure where to begin. Without hesitation, Brandon approached him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, sir," he greeted. "How can I help you today?" Mr. Green looked at him, his eyes brightening slightly. "Thank you, young man. I'm looking for a car, something reliable. My wife and I have been driving the same car for over 15 years, and I think it's finally time for an upgrade. But honestly, these new models all look so complicated." Brandon chuckled, instantly sensing the man's apprehension. I completely understand, Mr. Green. Technology in cars has certainly advanced a lot. Let's find something that has the reliability you're looking for without overwhelming you with too many bells and whistles. As they walked around the showroom, Brandon listened carefully to Mr. Green's needs, asking questions about his driving habits, preferences, and even sharing stories about his own family's experiences with cars. Brandon found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation, and when they finally settled on a modest, reliable model, Mr. Green looked at him with a smile that was both grateful and relieved. "Thank you, Brandon," he said sincerely. "You've made this process much easier than I expected. It's nice to know there are still people out there who care more about helping than just selling." When Mr. Green left that day, Brandon felt a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't experienced in years. He knew that the sale hadn't been as high as his previous targets, but the satisfaction of helping someone find exactly what they needed resonated far more deeply. Tom and Marcus were quick to notice Brandon's transformation. During one of their weekly check-ins, Tom couldn't help but bring it up. "Brandon," he began with a smile, "I've been watching the way you've been handling clients recently. I have to say, it's impressive. It's clear you've taken the feedback to heart." Brandon looked down, a bit embarrassed. "Thank you, Tom. I just realized I'd lost sight of what's important. I thought being the top salesman meant focusing on numbers, but I was wrong. It's about people." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Sales will follow when clients feel respected and valued. You're becoming a leader in more ways than one." The praise was unexpected, but it filled Brandon with a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer saw himself as someone who merely closed deals. He wanted to be someone who left a positive impact on everyone he encountered. He even began mentoring newer employees, including Sarah, who had become a close confidant. He shared with them his experiences, his mistakes, and the lessons he learned along the way, hoping to spare them from falling into the same traps he once had. For the first time, Capital City Motors felt like a true community, a place where employees weren't just colleagues but teammates working toward a shared vision. Customers began to take notice, too, leaving feedback that praised the dealership's warm and welcoming environment. Word spread, and soon, people came not only for the cars but for the experience. Brandon's journey from arrogance to humility had left a profound mark on the dealership. His transformation served as a reminder to everyone that success wasn't defined by numbers or titles, but by the respect, kindness, and empathy shown to others. Capital City Motors was no longer just a dealership. It was a place where every customer, every employee, and every interaction mattered. As Brandon looked out over the showroom one evening, watching his colleagues laugh and share stories with clients, he felt a sense of peace. He had found something far more valuable than a high commission or a shiny title. He had found purpose and belonging, qualities he now realized were the foundation of true success. Embracing the transformation. As Capital City Motors continued to evolve under the new values James Reynolds had reestablished, Brandon wasn't the only one undergoing a transformation. The dealership itself had become a symbol of change, a place that now echoed with a genuine sense of community, respect, and empathy, qualities that extended beyond just interactions with customers. The weekly customer feedback sessions had become a highlight for the team. These sessions were no longer just about reviewing customer comments. They became an opportunity for everyone to learn, to celebrate successes, and to address challenges openly. What began as a formality had turned into a ritual of growth, a moment each week where the team came together, unified by their shared commitment to Capital Motors' mission. One Thursday afternoon, as the team gathered in the conference room for their weekly review, Tom took his place at the front of the room, a satisfied smile on his face. He held up a folder containing a set of handwritten notes, carefully transcribed from a stack of feedback forms that had arrived just that morning. "Today's session is a little different," he began, glancing around the room. "We've received something special. These aren't just feedback forms, they're letters from customers. Real letters, sent in by hand. I thought it might be nice to read a few of them out loud." The room filled with murmurs of surprise and curiosity. Written letters were rare in an era where digital feedback was the norm, and the thought of customers taking the time to write personal notes spoke volumes. Tom opened the first letter, glancing at the signature before reading aloud. This one is from a woman named Mrs. Haywood. She writes, "Dear Capital City Motors team, I wanted to take a moment to thank you for the exceptional care and kindness I experienced during my recent visit. I've always dreaded going to car dealerships, but this time was different. My salesperson, Sarah, made me feel like I was more than just a sale. She listened to my concerns, respected my budget, and helped me find a car that I feel safe and comfortable in. Please thank her for me. You've gained a customer for life." Tom looked up from the letter, meeting Sarah's eyes. She blushed, the pride evident in her smile. The room burst into applause, her colleagues cheering as she sheepishly nodded in acknowledgement. For Sarah, who had joined Capital Motors with little experience, but an eagerness to learn, this moment validated all the effort she had put into her work. She felt respected and valued, not only by her customers, but also by her team. Tom moved on to the next letter, a slightly longer one written in neat, careful handwriting. This one's from Mr. Alvaro. He writes, "To Capital City Motors, I am writing to express my gratitude for an exceptional experience with your team, particularly with a gentleman named Brandon. I walked into the dealership feeling uncertain, overwhelmed, and even a bit out of place. Brandon took the time to explain each option to me, never once rushing or pressuring me. He treated me with the same respect and attentiveness that he'd likely show any high-profile client. It's rare to see this kind of care and customer service these days. Please know that you have a stellar team member in Brandon. I'll be recommending Capital City Motors to my family and friends." A hush fell over the room as Tom finished reading. Brandon sat at the back, his face a mixture of surprise and humility. Applause rippled through the crowd again, this time more heartfelt, with many of his colleagues glancing over at him with genuine admiration. Brandon, who once would have basked in this moment with pride, now felt a quiet, profound sense of accomplishment. It was no longer about recognition or praise. It was about knowing that he'd made a difference. "Thank you, Brandon," Tom said, his gaze warm with approval. "This is exactly the kind of experience we want every customer to have." Brandon nodded, the weight of the compliment settling on him in a way that felt both grounding and uplifting. He realized then that he was no longer driven by a need to prove himself, nor by a desire for the status that came with high sales numbers. His purpose had shifted, aligning more closely with the values Capital Motors now championed. Outside of the dealership, word about Capital City Motors' transformation began to spread. Customers shared their experiences with friends and family, many of whom had previously avoided the dealership due to the intimidating, high-pressure atmosphere it had once been known for. But now, people came for the welcoming environment, the patient and attentive staff, and the commitment to service over sales. James Reynolds, though often busy with his responsibilities as CEO, kept a close eye on the changes at Capital City Motors. He received regular reports from Tom and occasionally stopped by the dealership to observe the team in action. During one such visit, he noted the subtle but telling details. Salespeople greeting each customer with warmth, offering assistance without hovering or pressuring, and even taking time to ask questions about the customer's needs and preferences. One Friday afternoon, James decided to pay an impromptu visit to the dealership. He parked his car in the lot, observing the dealership from a distance for a moment, allowing himself to take in the scene. The windows reflected the bright afternoon sunlight, and inside, he could see employees moving with purpose, each one seeming genuinely engaged in their work. When he walked in, he was greeted by a young woman at the reception desk, who welcomed him with a friendly smile. James nodded, offering a polite greeting in return. He didn't announce his identity, opting instead to blend into the atmosphere, hoping to observe without drawing attention. He wandered through the showroom, noting the changes with satisfaction. Near the luxury sedans, he saw Brandon speaking with a couple who appeared to be in their late 60s. Brandon's demeanor was one of patience and attentiveness. His posture relaxed as he listened intently to the couple's questions about safety features, gas mileage, and comfort. James watched as Brandon guided the couple through each detail, answering their questions with care. He showed them different options, discussing each model's features without a hint of impatience or rush. There was no flashy pitch, no pressure, just an honest, thoughtful approach to helping them make an informed decision. The couple seemed genuinely appreciative, and James noted the relaxed, comfortable expressions on their faces, a stark contrast to the anxious, hesitant looks he'd observed on customers' faces during his first visit. As James continued observing, Tom approached him, a smile of surprise and warmth spreading across his face. "Mr. Reynolds, it's good to see you again." Tom greeted him with a firm handshake. "Likewise, Tom," James replied. "I wanted to stop by, see how things are going here firsthand. From what I can see, you and your team have done an outstanding job." Tom's face lit up, his pride unmistakable. "Thank you, sir. It's been a journey, but everyone has really embraced the changes. I couldn't be prouder of the team." James nodded, his gaze drifting back to Brandon, who was now walking the couple to the finance department, where they could finalize their decision. "And Brandon, he's really turned things around, hasn't he?" Tom chuckled, following James's gaze. "He has. At first, I think it was a difficult adjustment for him. He was used to being top dog, focused on numbers above all else. But once he realized what he was capable of with a different approach, he became one of our strongest advocates for the new culture." James smiled, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. "That's the kind of leadership we need. Not just people who can perform well, but those who can inspire change in others. I think Brandon's journey speaks volumes to what Capital Motors stands for now." As the day wound down, James took a moment to address the team, gathering them around in the main showroom. The employees assembled, exchanging glances of surprise and curiosity, their anticipation building as they looked to their CEO. "First, let me say how proud I am of each and every one of you," James began, his voice warm and filled with sincerity. "When I first started Capital Motors, I wanted to create a company that was more than just a place to buy cars. I wanted it to be a place where people could come and feel respected, valued, and cared for. I lost sight of that along the way. But thanks to all of you, Capital Motors has returned to those roots." He paused, looking around at the attentive faces before him. "I've watched how each of you has embraced the changes over these past few weeks. I've read the feedback from customers who leave this dealership feeling valued and respected, and it's because of the dedication and integrity you bring to your work every day. Capital Motors isn't just about cars. It's about people, and you've proven that." The team broke into applause, the energy in the room palpable. James noticed Brandon standing toward the back, his face filled with a quiet pride. He gave Brandon a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey he had undertaken and the transformation he had undergone. As the applause faded, James continued, "Moving forward, I want you all to know that Capital Motors is committed to being a place where values come first. We'll continue to prioritize customer feedback, offer ongoing training, and build an environment where everyone, from customers to employees, feels respected. This is the future of Capital Motors, and each of you is a vital part of it." With those words, James concluded his speech, the team's applause filling the showroom once again. As they dispersed, chatting animatedly among themselves, Brandon felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had grown in ways he hadn't thought possible, shedding his old mindset and embracing a new, more meaningful purpose. The praise and acknowledgement from James felt like the culmination of his journey, a testament to his growth and newfound commitment to Capital Motors values. Standing there in the showroom, watching his colleagues and feeling the vibrant energy of a team united by shared purpose, Brandon knew that this was just the beginning. The changes at Capital Motors would continue, and he was proud to be a part of a company that truly valued people above all else. In that moment, Brandon felt at home, not because of his sales numbers or his status, but because he had finally found his place in a community built on respect, integrity, and service. And for the first time, he understood that true success wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey, a journey that Capital Motors had set him on, and one he was ready to continue with pride. The legacy of transformation. Months passed, and Capital City Motors' transformation continued to ripple outward, creating an indelible impact on everyone associated with it. What had started as a single confrontation between a CEO and a salesman had blossomed into a culture shift, reshaping Capital Motors not just in spirit, but in reputation and practice. From the customers who felt genuinely valued to the employees who felt supported in their growth, the dealership had become a model of customer service and integrity, a rare achievement in an industry often marked by high-pressure sales tactics. Brandon, once known for his aggressive sales style and top numbers, had become the heart of Capital City Motors' new approach. He had stepped into a new role, not only as a salesman but as a mentor and example, helping others find fulfillment in creating genuine connections with clients. The probation that had initially filled him with dread had transformed into a mission, one he took pride in every day. One bright Tuesday morning, Brandon arrived at the dealership early. He had volunteered to lead a training session on customer relations, the same kind of training he had once balked at. Now, it had become one of the most fulfilling parts of his job. The training room was set up with rows of chairs, a presentation board, and a small stack of handouts detailing Capital Motors' core values, which James and Tom had developed together. As the junior associates and new hires filed into the room, Brandon greeted each of them warmly, his manner welcoming and approachable. Once everyone was seated, he began the session by sharing his story, not as a cautionary tale, but as an example of growth. Some of you may know that I wasn't always like this. Brandon started with a wry smile, which earned a few chuckles from the audience. In fact, if you told me a year ago that I'd be standing here leading a session on customer service, I'd have laughed. Back then, my only focus was on the numbers. I wanted to close deals, hit targets, and be the best. And sure, I made sales, but I lost sight of something important, something Capital Motors now stands for. He paused, looking around at the attentive faces, each one representing a new generation of Capital Motors. What I've learned, and what I hope each of you will take away, is that success isn't just about numbers or recognition. True success is about the relationships you build, the trust you earn, and the respect you show to everyone who walks through those doors. One of the newer employees, a young man named Lucas, raised his hand. "How did you change your mindset?" he asked, his tone curious. "I mean, it sounds like you went from one extreme to the other. What made it all click?" Brandon considered the question, nodding thoughtfully. "It was a journey," he admitted. "It started with humility. I had to let go of my ego and accept that maybe I didn't know everything. The turning point was realizing that every customer who walked in deserved respect, no matter what. And once I let go of the old way of thinking, I started to see the value in what we're doing here. We're not just selling cars, we're giving people something that matters to them." The session continued, with Brandon guiding the new hires through scenarios, role-playing exercises, and open discussions. He emphasized empathy, patience, and the importance of listening, skills he had once overlooked in favor of a quick close. The room was filled with energy, the associates responding with enthusiasm and a shared sense of purpose. At the end of the session, as the associates filed out, Lucas approached Brandon again, a hesitant but hopeful look in his eyes. "Thank you for sharing that, Brandon. It's inspiring to see how you turn things around. I hope I can have that kind of impact one day." Brandon clapped him on the shoulder, a sense of pride swelling within him. "You will, Lucas. Just remember, every interaction is an opportunity to make a difference. Focus on the person in front of you, and the rest will follow." Outside the training room, Capital City Motors continued to thrive. The new customer feedback system was yielding a steady stream of positive reviews, each one reinforcing the dealership's new reputation as a welcoming, respectful environment. Word-of-mouth referrals had surged, bringing in clients from all backgrounds, from young first-time buyers to older clients looking for an upgrade. Sales were up, but more importantly, customer loyalty had reached new heights. The effects of Capital Motors' transformation had reached the corporate offices as well. Other branches within the Capital Motors Group began taking notice, requesting guidance on implementing similar changes. James Reynolds saw the potential for the Capital City Motors model to become a blueprint for the entire company, something he had never imagined when he'd first decided to test the waters as an anonymous customer months ago. On a crisp autumn day, James arranged a visit to Capital City Motors with a few high-level corporate executives who were interested in witnessing the dealership's success firsthand. Tom had prepared for the visit meticulously, coordinating with his team to ensure everything was in place. Brandon, along with several other sales associates, had been briefed about the visit but was encouraged to go about their day as usual. The day of the visit, the corporate executives arrived and were greeted by Tom, who led them through the showroom, pointing out key changes that had contributed to the dealership's success. As they walked, James watched his team with pride, noticing the genuine interactions between salespeople and customers, the laughter and the warm smiles exchanged across the showroom. It was a far cry from the tense, transactional atmosphere he had once encountered. At one point, James observed Brandon as he spoke with a young woman browsing the SUVs. She appeared uncertain, explaining to Brandon that she was buying a car for the first time, and felt overwhelmed by the choices. Brandon listened patiently, his manner reassuring as he answered her questions and offered guidance. There was no rush, no impatience, only the calm, respectful approach he had come to embrace. As the conversation ended and the woman thanked Brandon, he noticed James watching him from across the room. Brandon nodded, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. James returned the nod, a gesture of approval and respect that carried more weight than words. After the tour, James gathered the Capital City Motors team together for a brief meeting in the showroom. His corporate guests watched with interest as the team assembled, their attention focused on James, who stood at the center, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I just want to take a moment to recognize what you all have achieved here," James began, his voice carrying a quiet pride. "When I first stepped into this dealership, I saw potential, but I also saw a need for change. I'm thrilled to say that each of you has risen to that challenge. Capital City Motors has become a beacon of what this company stands for: respect, integrity, and service." He paused, glancing at Brandon and then Tom, his smile deepening. "Thanks to Tom's leadership and Brandon's dedication to personal growth, we've created something truly remarkable. I believe we can take the success of Capital City Motors and bring it to every dealership in the Capital Motors Group. You've set the standard, and I am deeply grateful for the hard work you've put in." Applause filled the showroom, and Brandon felt a surge of pride as his colleagues cheered. It was a moment of triumph not just for him, but for everyone who had embraced the change, who had chosen to prioritize people over profits and values over numbers. As the applause faded, James turned to the executives who had accompanied him. "This is what we're striving for across all branches," he said. "Capital City Motors isn't just selling cars, they're creating an experience rooted in respect and integrity. That's the legacy we want to build company-wide." The corporate executives nodded, visibly impressed by what they had seen. They exchanged words of congratulations with Tom and shook hands with Brandon, acknowledging the work he had done to make Capital City Motors a place where customers felt valued. When the meeting concluded, Brandon found himself approached by James, who offered him a rare private moment. "You've come a long way, Brandon," James said, his voice quiet yet full of meaning. "I hope you're proud of what you've accomplished." Brandon met James's gaze, the significance of his words sinking in. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I am proud, but I know I couldn't have done it without the support of Tom and the rest of the team. This isn't just my journey, it's everyone's." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's the kind of perspective that makes a true leader. Remember that. Capital Motors needs people like you, people who aren't just focused on numbers, but on making a real difference. As James walked away, Brandon felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had finally found his purpose. Capital City Motors had become a home, not just a workplace, and he was no longer just a salesman. He was part of something larger, something meaningful, a legacy of transformation that would continue to grow long after him. That evening, as Brandon closed the dealership with Tom and Sarah by his side, he looked around the empty showroom, the cars lined up in neat rows, waiting for tomorrow's clients. It struck him then that Capital City Motors was more than a dealership. It was a place where people could connect, where values could flourish, and where a simple act of respect could change lives. And in that quiet moment, standing among friends and colleagues who had become family, Brandon knew that Capital City Motors was exactly where he was meant to be.